I want you to remember what the disciples said from the story. They said, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes." And so many churches that I know just kind of limp along month by month with this attitude of, we have nothing here but, we have nothing here but. And what does Jesus say to that sort of an attitude? Well, this is what he says to his disciples. He says, "Bring them here to me." So one of the things that Jasmine and I really appreciate about this church community is the vision statement. So you know that we, the people of Stone Church, aspire to be the heart of Christ in the heart of St. John. We're the heart of Christ in the heart of the city. It's beautiful. So what is the heart of Christ? Well, I think volumes of theological books could be written on that particular question, but surely one could say at the very least that the heart of Christ is love, this passionate love, this fierce love, this self-sacrificial love that's directed towards everyone, but particularly towards those who are lost, towards those on the margins. And I believe that as disciples of Jesus, we have been called to receive that love, to embrace that love fully, such to the extent that our hearts are set on fire by that love, to the point that our hearts are consumed by that love, to the point where we begin to express that love to those around us. So where are we as Stone Church? We're in the heart of the city. We're in the heart of a city where the needs are very, very high. I can tell you that we have a very high child poverty rate here in St. John. It's a 48% child poverty rate in the inner city of St. John in some of these core neighborhoods. I'm willing to bet that the high school dropout rate is higher in these neighborhoods than it is elsewhere. We all know that substance abuse is an issue here in the urban core. It's an issue elsewhere as well, but in our neighborhood, it's certainly a very pressing issue. We have been called to be the heart of Christ, the love of Christ, the compassion of Christ in this particular setting. What an incredible challenge that is. But what does it look like specifically? That's the question that I do want to explore today, and I want to explore that question by taking a deeper look at our passage from Matthew's Gospel. And what we learn from this passage from Matthew's Gospel is this: we, the people of the church, we, the people of Stone Church, have been called to dedicate our resources to Christ so that he may use them to bring comfort and relief to the community around us. All right. So according to Matthew, Jesus finds out about the death of his friend John the Baptist. And he does what I think a lot of us would do if we were in a comparable situation. He goes to a secluded place. He goes to a place where he can be by himself. But even Jesus' vacations can go awry from time to time, because as soon as the boat reaches the shore, what does he learn? Well, he finds out that crowds of people, needy people, have beaten him to this particular spot. But far from being angered by this interruption, Jesus has compassion on the people. He has compassion on the crowds. And that's the heart of Christ. It's compassion. So all that day, he let the people bring their sick to him. All that day, he preached to them. He's doing the work that the Father had called him to do. But soon, the disciples start to get concerned. They start to worry. And it's out of a sense of concern that they turn to Jesus and say, "Look, here we are in the middle of the wilderness, and it's not like there are restaurants around here or something. There's no 7-Eleven nearby. Okay, so if people stay here much longer, they're going to get very hungry and they're going to faint on the way home, or at least to the nearest village. So why don't you send them all away, dismiss them to the nearest village so that they can get something to eat now before they start getting really hungry?" Okay. First off, let's give credit where credit is due. The disciples did something right here. They accurately identified a real need that existed among the people. namely the fact that the crowds are hungry and they could potentially faint from hunger. And may I suggest that's exactly what contemporary disciples of Jesus need to do here and now in our setting. That's exactly what good churches need to do. We need to cultivate a keen awareness of precisely what the needs are in the surrounding community. As a matter of fact, when Jazz and I first came here to the urban core of St. John, I think it was back in 2014, when we first came here, our top priority was to go through all of the nonprofit organizations, the registered charities working in this area, in these neighborhoods. Just look them up online, and then cold call them and book basically meetings with some of their representatives. And from that, we learned so much about the needs that existed in the city and how those needs could potentially be met. For example, we learned that there are a striking number of people in these neighborhoods who lack basic literacy skills and who can't even think about getting a GED or a high school equivalent because that basic level of reading isn't there. We learned that there aren't enough safe places for homeless people to stay after the homeless shelters have closed, say at 8 o'clock in the morning. There are not enough places for them to go and hang out. We learned that there were a lot of newcomers in this city, people who have come here from Africa and Asia and from Latin America and the Middle East, who are desperately looking for opportunities to learn English and practice English with native speakers. We learned that there are a lot of people who are profoundly alone, people who lack a proper support network to get them through those tough times in life. So we learned all of this, yes, by getting to know people in the neighborhood, but also by meeting with some of these nonprofit organizations. So once again, good on the disciples for accurately identifying the problem, namely the fact that the crowds don't have enough to eat. One complication, though, they don't have any food to give them to eat. As far as they're concerned, the most they can do is just send them on their way to hopefully get food from somewhere else. But Jesus has different plans. Jesus says there's no need to dismiss them. You give them something to eat. Now, I know for a fact that many of you have done internships as part of your vocational training. You have to spend a few months following a more experienced, doctor on his rounds, or more experienced nurse, or months upon months watching an electrician or a plumber practice his craft, and you're taking notes and you're asking questions, and maybe every once in a while you get a chance to assist. But inevitably, the day comes when your mentor turns to you and says, okay, now you do it. You sew up the wound. You give the patient the needle. You fix the leak. You put together the lesson plan. You do the funeral. You do the service. And all of a sudden, you got to step up. And it's scary. You know that feeling, right? That's exactly how the disciples may have felt when Jesus turned to them in the middle of their internship and said, okay, you do it. You give them something to eat. The life of a Christian is a very active one. It's a life of doing. You can't really stay in the classroom forever and just learn the theory. At some point, you have to get out there and do the work of Christ. And it's not as if Jesus won't help you. He will, right? But inevitably, you have to actually engage in the real mission. But when they hear the Lord say, you give them something to eat, the disciples immediately protest. And I don't blame them, actually, because they say, look, give them something to eat. All we have here is this lunch that some kid brought, right? There's 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And I want you to take note of this important fact. The disciples don't mention the loaves and the 2 fishes because they believe that something can actually be done with them. They don't actually think, we can use these to feed the crowds. They mention the loaves and the fishes to emphasize that they really don't have much at all and that it's useless. And I want you to listen to their choice of words. They say, we have nothing but. Right? We have nothing but. But it's amazing how exceptionally patient the Lord is here. He just says to the disciples, look, bring them to me. Just bring them to me now. And after Jesus receives the loaves and the fishes, he then gets the disciples to take care of crowd control. They go out amongst the people. They get everyone to sit down in groups. And then once everyone is seated, Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he says the traditional Jewish blessing. He breaks the bread. And then something absolutely incredible happens. The disciples keep going up to get the loaves and the fish, and they found that the source of food is just inexhaustible. And they begin to feed this enormous crowd of men, women, and children with just a small lunch. And it's because of the miraculous power of the Lord. And as it turns out, it's an extravagant provision, because not only do people get enough to tide them over for the next little while, there's actually way more left over. Everybody has enough to eat, and then there's an abundant overflow of the food. They've been fed extravagantly. And I want to suggest to you that, of course, as followers of Jesus Christ, what we need to do is identify ourselves with the disciples in this story, right? Just like the disciples, Jesus is encouraging us to be out and about in the broader world with our eyes open, perceiving the needs that exist around us. But not only does Jesus want us to be aware of those needs, he wants us to actually meet those needs. He wants us to meet the needs of those who are beyond the walls of our church. I've said this before. I'm sure Jasmine has said it before, and everyone pretty much who has preached here. The church doesn't exist for itself to meet its own needs. We exist for the world around us. We have a mission to a hurting world around us, to a hurting neighborhood, a community around us. And part of meeting those needs means taking stock of the talents, of the resources that we have available to us. The problem I've noticed is this. 21st century disciples often fall into the same trap of doubt as first century disciples from 2,000 years ago. That is, we gripe and complain about how our resources are inadequate. I want you to remember what the disciples said from the story. They said, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes." Right? We have nothing here but. We have nothing here but a handful of parishioners who like to play music every once in a while. Or we have nothing here in our parish but a few ladies who like to quilt. Or we have nothing here but some folks who enjoy baking. Or we have nothing here but a few retired teachers or a few retired nurses. Or we have nothing here but a little bit of money remaining to us once our bills are paid. And so many churches that I know just kind of limp along month by month with this attitude of we have nothing here but, we have nothing here but. And what does Jesus say to that sort of an attitude? Well, this is what he says to his disciples. He says, "Bring them here to me." That's a pretty easy step, right? Just bring them here to me. That's all Jesus says. Bring me what you have. Bring me your talents. Bring me those retired teachers. Bring me those retired nurses. Bring me some of that energy that the youth have. And I don't care how small or how meager or how useless you think it is, bring it to me. I'll do something with it. In all the 15 years of my ordained ministry, I've served in small churches. I've been proud to. And in each of these churches, there has been this pervasive sense of inadequacy. And maybe you've sensed it in some of the churches you've been to before, this sense that because we're small, there's not much we can do. The only churches that can make a significant impact on the community are churches that have multiple paid staff, churches that have an army of volunteers, churches that have an enormous missions budget. And that's the same attitude the disciples have in this story, am I right? Like, we fail to realize that when we hand over something small and seemingly insignificant to Jesus, he can transfigure it, he can transform it, he can multiply it, and he can amplify it. I'll just give you a concrete example of this. I read a book on, I think it was missions years ago, about a church whose leadership board got together and seriously began to discuss what sort of resources they had at their disposal. And as it turns out, there was a guy in their congregation who was a mechanic. He loved to tinker with cars. So what did they do? They had some prayer time, they had some discussions, and the man agreed to set up shop on the church parking lot every Saturday morning. And every Saturday morning, people came to him to get advice. You know, he would look at their car engines, he would give them a little advice. Maybe it was a small fix, and he would do it right there for them. And then from that came opportunities for the church to engage with some of those people from the neighborhood to start having conversations about the gospel. And that's a perfect example of how a church took stock of its resources, dedicated them to Jesus, and allowed Jesus to use those to meet the needs of the community. Right? And they probably started out by saying, oh, geez, all we have here is one guy who likes to fix cars. Big deal. But they dedicated this man's skill to Christ, and look what they were able to do. They were able to have at least a small impact on their neighborhood. And what I love about Stone Church is the fact that I'm probably preaching to the choir here, because I think you get this. You understand this. Years before Jazz and I ever came to Stone Church, you, the people of this parish, have loved this neighborhood. You've had a love for the South End and for the Uptown area and Waterloo Village. Right? You've had a love for the people of the surrounding community. And you've had a keen eye for what the suffering of this neighborhood might entail. And you saw that there were people living below the poverty line, and they were struggling so much financially that at the end of the month, they barely had any money left over to even do their laundry. They didn't have enough pocket change to go and do their laundry at the local laundromat. So you identified a need. And then you took stock of your resources. Well, maybe there were a couple of parishioners around who had some washing machines and dryers that they were going to get rid of and replace soon. And then the stone-washed laundry program was created. So now people have a place to come and do their laundry for free, which is awesome. But whenever I come here to the laundry program, there are people talking to the people who are waiting to have their laundry done. I've seen people praying with some of our guests. That's ministry. That's the heart of Christ in the heart of St. John. And what I believe the Lord is saying to us through this particular passage of Scripture is this: more of this, please. Right? More of this. Have compassion on the crowds. See how they're suffering. See where their needs are. And take your resources. And again, I don't care how meager those resources are, how insignificant you think they are. Give them to me. I will multiply them. I will enable you to meet those needs, says the Lord. I will empower you to do infinitely more than you can ask or imagine. Then, Stone Church, I believe, will grow into the fullness of that vision. We will indeed be the heart of Christ in the heart of St. John, the heart of Christ in the heart of a hurting city.